One of the best photography lessons I ever learned came from trying to reverse engineer photographs. When I interned at BCBG Max Azria back in college, I had the coolest boss. David was the company's in-house photographer, but also taught photography at Otis College of Art and Design. He wasn't an incredible photographer, but what I appreciated most was how patient he was and how willing he was to teach. Whenever we had some downtime, he'd grab a stack of fashion magazines and lay them out on the table. Then he'd point to one of the covers and ask, "How do you think they lit this?" We would study the image, analyze the lighting, build our own version of it, photograph ourselves, and then composite our faces back into the original cover. If the lighting matched, the composite would look natural and believable. If it didn't, well, it would just look funny. I love this exercise because it completely changed the way I looked at photographs. Instead of just admiring an image, I started asking questions. Where's the main light source coming from? How harsh or soft is it? Is there a fill light? How far is the light source from the subject? Every photograph became a puzzle waiting to be solved. Even now, years later, when I see fashion magazine covers, I think back to those afternoons in the studio with David. Every now and then, when the cover really catches my eye, I'll still try to figure out how it was lit. And today, I'm going to recreate 2 Vogue covers with my face. To do it, I'll be using Zhiyun's new M60 Ultra along with their G300. Zhiyun recently launched the M60 Ultra, which is a portable 60-watt constant light that's only slightly bigger than my phone. Even though it's so small, it puts out a surprising amount of light, has a built-in battery, and can even be combined with multiple units to build larger lighting setups. After spending some time with it, I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to see what these little lights are really capable of. Traditionally, many commercial fashion shoots have been done with studio strobes because they offer a lot more power. But since I shoot both video and stills, using continuous lights work for me because I can easily switch between the two without changing my lighting setup. What I love about the Zhiyun system isn't just how simple and intuitive the lights are, but how well everything works together through the app. You can connect all of your Zhiyun lights, even different models, and control them all from your phone. That might not sound like a big deal since there's an app for just about everything these days, but imagine you're standing in front of the camera as both the photographer and the model. Instead of walking over to each light every time you want to make a small adjustment, I can change the brightness or color temperature right from where I'm standing. When you're working with multiple lights, those little adjustments add up, and being able to control everything remotely saves a surprising amount of time and keeps the creative process flowing. Let's start with this cover. Let's take a second to analyze this image. Whenever I try to figure out how an image was lit, I like to go through a simple mental checklist. First of all, where is the light coming from? Second, how big is the light source? Third, how much fill is there? Fourth, what lens and aperture might have been used? And finally, how can I recreate that with the gear I have? Let's go through them one by one. Okay, where is the light source coming from? The first thing I look for is the direction of the highlights. On camera right, I see highlights on her forehead, the bridge of her nose, her cheek, the lapel, and the entire right side of her jacket. The nose shadow also falls gently toward camera left. Those clues tell me the key light is coming from camera right, slightly above eye level. I also think it's positioned just a little behind her because the brightest part of her face is wrapping around the side rather than hitting her straight on. How big is the light source? The next thing I look at is how the light wraps around the face. Notice how gradual the transition is from light to shadow. There aren't any harsh edges, and the light rolls very gently across her face. That's usually a sign of a relatively large light source. Since she's standing on the beach, my guess is the sun was either softened by a large scrim or some type of diffusion. We can't know for sure, but whatever the setup was, the quality of light is definitely soft and directional. How much fill light is there? The shadow side of her face gives us another clue. We can still clearly see her left eye, eyebrow, jawline, and neck. Nothing disappears into deep shadow. Outdoors, that's not surprising. The sky, the sand, and even the ocean all act as giant reflectors, bouncing right back into the shadow side of her face. If I'm recreating this indoors, I'll have to create that fill myself. What lens and aperture might have been used? Perspective is another thing I pay attention to. She doesn't look distorted, but she also doesn't look overly compressed. My guess is this was photographed with a medium to medium telephoto lens, maybe 50 to 100 millimeters on the full frame camera. Since I'm only compositing my face, I'll probably use my 50mm 0.95 Noctilux and match the camera distance and framing as closely as possible. Looking at her face, she's sharp from the tip of her nose all the way back to her ears. That tells me this probably wasn't shot wide open. At the same time, the background isn't completely sharp either, so I don't think it was stopped down dramatically. If I had to guess, I'd probably start somewhere around f5.6 to f8. Again, I can't know for certain, but that's where I'd start. So, how can I recreate this image in the studio using the gear I have? Now that I've studied the image, it's time to translate those observations into a lighting setup. Since I'm only replacing the face, I don't need to light my entire body exactly the same way. I only need to match the lighting on my face. That actually makes the challenge both easier and harder. It's easier because I can work with much smaller lights. But it's also harder because if the light on my face doesn't match perfectly, the composite will immediately feel fake. For the key light, I'm thinking of placing one M60 Ultra on camera right, slightly above eye level, and shooting it through a scrim to create a larger, softer source. For the fill, I don't think simply bouncing light back with a V-flat will be enough. If you look closely, the shadow side of her face isn't all the same tone. The front of her cheek stays in shadow, but the side of her cheek closer to her ear catches a very soft, diffuse highlight. That tells me the light is wrapping around her face instead of just filling it evenly. I'll start with a V-flat or white foam core to see how much natural wrap I can get. If that doesn't recreate that subtle highlight, I'll bring in the second M60 and very gently feather it onto the side of my face until it matches what I see in the original image. Alright, we've done the detective work. Now let's head to the studio and see if we're right. So before we get started, I would like to show you my setup for the day. To the left here, I have my pair of Zhiyun G300 lights. These are 300 watt constant lights. And then I have these M60 Ultras. These are 60 watt portable constant lights that Zhiyun just launched. And then I have a pair of hot shoe mounts with swivel heads. And in front of them, I have a tape measure. And I have the tape measure because I will be shooting the photos with my M10P Safari and my 50mm Noctilux. As most of you guys know, the M10P Safari is a manual focus only camera, and I need a way of telling the distance between myself and the camera, and that's what the tape measure is for. Behind the camera, I have my 60cm and 90cm parabolic softboxes. And I have my lens cleaning solution as well as my favorite lens wipe from Tamarkin Camera. Gotta keep my lenses clean, right? Lastly, I have my iPad here because I will be constantly referring back to the original cover images just to make sure that I have the lighting set up correctly. And yeah, there you go. That's my setup for the day, and let's get to it. Okay, so I have my tape measure here and I am going to tape it to my camera so I could actually tell distance. I am going to tape it to the top of the camera towards the back where the sensor is so I could get a more accurate reading. I'll just tape it here to where the hot shoe is. I think that's a good place for it. Also just want to be very careful because I don't want to damage the camera or leave any residue, right? Okay. This seems to be on pretty good now. Okay. Now let's do the same exercise with the second cover. We're going to use the same 5 questions as before, but this image is a little different. Instead of natural daylight, we're now looking at a controlled studio portrait. Where's the light coming from? The first thing I notice is the direction of the highlights. I see highlights on her forehead, the bridge of her nose, the camera right cheek, and the right side of her neck. Another thing I noticed is the glossy black outfit. Because it's so reflective, it gives us another clue as to where the light is coming from. The nose shadow also falls gently toward camera left, and the left side of her face gradually falls into shadow. So my guess is the key light is coming from camera right, slightly above eye level, and angled downward just a little. How big is the light source? Now let's look at the quality of the light. It's soft, but it's also very controlled. Notice how the light wraps gently across the front of her face, but the camera left cheek falls into shadow fairly quickly. The nose shadow still has definition, and the jawline is nicely sculpted. If the light source were very small, the shadows would be much harsher. If it were much larger, we'd lose a lot of that shape. So my guess is this was lit with a medium-sized modifier. I think my G300 with a 60cm parabolic softbox should get me pretty close. How much fill is there? This image definitely has some fill, but it's very subtle. We can still see detail in the shadow eye, but the left cheek, ear, and hair become pretty dark. That tells me the photographer wanted more contrast and more shape. I'll probably start with a white foam core on camera left and slowly add fill until the shadows feel right. What lens and aperture might have been used? Let's look at the perspective. She doesn't look distorted, but the portrait also doesn't feel heavily compressed. My guess is this was photographed with a medium to medium telephoto lens, probably somewhere around 50 to 100mm on a full frame camera. Again, I'll use my 50mm Noctilux and adjust my camera distance until the perspective matches as closely as possible. Looking at her face, everything from her eyes to the hair at the back of her head appears sharp. The glossy outfit is also nicely defined. That tells me this probably wasn't photographed wide open. If I had to guess, I'd probably start somewhere around f5.6 to f8. How can I recreate it? The G300 will definitely be my main light here. At up to 300 watts, it has more than enough output for this kind of setup. I'll start with the 60cm parabolic softbox positioned on camera right, slightly above eye level to create the overall shape and direction of the light. If I feel like the light isn't wrapping enough, I can always switch over to my larger 90cm parabolic. For the fill, I'll keep things simple. I'll start with a white foam core on camera left and see if that's enough to gently open up the shadows. If I need a little more control, I'll introduce one of the M60 Ultras at very low power, either feathered into the foam core or bounced off of it, so I can add just a touch more fill without flattening the portrait. Now let's head back into the studio and see how close we can get. Okay, so I just finished shooting the two covers and I have to say it was not what I expected at all. Well, some parts were what I expected, but I thought the Greta Lee cover was going to be the easier one of the two, and that one turned out to be the harder one and took me like 3 hours to recreate. The Emma Stone cover took me like 20 minutes. So yeah, that was pretty interesting. I think what was difficult about the Greta Lee cover was not the key light, was not the bounce light, it was the fill light in the front of the face. And I think because she was out in the open shade, and she had sand or ground as her huge reflector, so the light that was bounced back to her face was very soft and diffused. Whereas I'm sitting here in the studio using different lights and different modifiers trying to recreate that. It was just really hard. And no matter what I did, I was getting catch lights in my irises, which she did not have in the photo. So that was a little frustrating for me. So I ended up bouncing the light towards the garage door and using that as the very soft diffused light to fill the front of my face. And the Emma Stone cover turned out to be super easy. I set up this one light, I angled it downward, and I just got to make sure my face was turned in the same direction, and that was it. And I only needed to focus on my face because I'm only photoshopping my face and I didn't need to worry about the background or anything like that. So it was really easy to recreate once I figured out the direction and the intensity of the light. So yeah, there we go. One thing this exercise reminded me is that great lighting isn't magic. It's observation. The more photographs you study, the more little clues you begin to notice. The direction of the shadows, how the light wraps around a face, the amount of fill. Even a reflective jacket can tell you where the light is coming from. Once you start seeing those things, every photograph becomes an opportunity to learn. I was really impressed by the M60 Ultra and the G300. They were more than capable of helping me recreate these lighting setups. Of course, getting the lighting right was only half the challenge. In the next video, I'll show you exactly how I composited my face into these magazine covers using Lightroom and Photoshop, from masking to color matching to the final retouch. Looking back, I don't think David was really teaching us how to recreate magazine covers. He was teaching us how to see. I'll see you in the next one.